Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at SVA. We are thrilled to have photographer Ethan Hill as tonight's guest speaker. Ethan is a portrait and celebrity photographer based in New York. He's a graduate of Art Center College of Design in California. His projects are wide-ranging and include anything from A-list celebrities in film, theater, and music to scientists working on cutting-edge research in medicine and technology. Clients include Entertainment Weekly, Esquire Magazine, Rolling Stone, Food and Wine, Harper's Bazaar, Newsweek, Time, Dell Computers, and UPS, among others. Aside from his commercial assignments, Ethan is involved in shooting personal, portrait-based projects, teaching at the International Center for Photography, and making and publishing artist books. So please help me welcome Ethan Hill to our lecture series.
Thank you, everybody. Daniel. I'd love to thank SVA for having me. This is a huge honor to be here, and to Jaime for inviting me. It's sort of, the timing is sort of perfect. This is the year that I've been in New York for 20 years. Next year is going to be the year that the big project that I ended up shooting that gave me a career and put me on the map will be the 20th anniversary next year of that project. If it's possible to dedicate nights to people, I'd like to dedicate this evening to Karen Pearson, who I couldn't have gotten it together for tonight without her help. So thank you for that. I was trying to think of, so I wanted to talk to you guys about, seeing as it's 20 years, here's 20 years of my life. I was trying to think of one word to sum this time up, and it's been a very interesting, weird, great trip to sort of go back through the boxes and look at all of this stuff again. And tumbleweed was the word that came to mind. I feel like I have lived like a tumbleweed in this business for the last 20 years. There's a really great Ruth Bernhardt documentary, which I think is sort of hard to find. I recently went back and looked on Amazon, I looked on eBay, and I couldn't find it. The last place I saw it was at the bookstore at the ICP, and you know, everybody knows Ruth Bernhardt's nudes and the still lives, and she has this great line in the film where someone asks her to shoot their cat, I think. It was a cat or a dog, and she very sort of nonchalantly said, well, you know, and then all of a sudden I was Ruth Bernhardt, pet photographer. And I thought, wow, yeah, why not? If you're gonna shoot the cat really nicely, then why not be that? So for this evening, I broke my life up into 4 parts. And I wanted to start at the beginning in the late 90s. So I moved to New York and got a job at 68 Degrees, which was a really wonderful black and white lab, which sort of doesn't exist anymore, only technically, and got folded into LTI. I worked there for many years, and 68 was the sort of high-end editorial fashion division. It catered to people like Stefan Seddenwy, and photographers of that caliber. It was fashion work that we were going for. My job was at the front desk, packing jobs, which meant I would go through film, I would make sure all of the contacts had been made for every roll of film that was run. I would dry prints, I would spot prints for dust. And when it was a real emergency, which it often was, I was messenger boy. And I would get on my bike and I would haul stuff up to whose ever office needed it. I was on the phone all the time, and I was the sort of like gatekeeper for, did you get your job on time or not? And most of the people were really, really nice to work with. And one of the clients was Harper's Bazaar. So this was the era. In 1992, this cover was the launch for a redesign, I believe. And Liz Tilberis was the editor-in-chief at Bazaar at the time. 92 was, if I read all of the information correctly, 92 was her first year there, and this was the relaunch of the magazine. Beautifully steered by Fabian Baron as the creative director. And I was 1 year into college at that time, and I remember seeing this cover, and it was just like one of those moments where you just, like, the image sinks in. You are just, like, something strikes you so viscerally, and maybe you don't have words as to why, and I think maybe 20-odd years later, today, I actually just figured out why this picture made such a huge impact on me. It was photographed by Patrick de Marchelier, and this was the beginning of Liz's era. Dennis Galanka, towards the end of the 90s, 97, 98, Dennis Galanka was the director, and Rebecca Greenfield was the worked with Dennis, and I was on the phone with those two all the time. And for me, when they were the nicest people under the sun, I heard that Liz Tilberis was the kindest person ever in a position that high, and I always wanted to meet her, and I never had the opportunity to. And I called Dennis up one day and I said, hey, you know, on a personal note, can I come in and show you some work? And he said, by all means, when do you want to come in? And Dennis gave me my start, and Rebecca gave me my start. So in 97, I started shooting fashion designers. I was the front of the book man for Harper's Bazaar. I absolutely loved the job. It was, everybody knew that was coming up. New boutique owners, amazing artists, up-and-coming writers, everybody that was getting their first chance, that was like the new buzz. I got to photograph many of those people. This is As For. They were, well, I guess this was sort of like a 90s phenomenon. They all lived together, and they all were in business together, and they all had cats, and they basically were always together. And I don't know, I just said, hey, can you all raise your cats up in the air? And I got one frame. The cats freaked out. We lost them immediately, scratching, hissing. Cats were gone under the bed, and that was over. Oh, I forgot to say something. The way I designed this presentation is that I had this personal rule for myself on every job, no matter if it was like all day or 10 minutes, I always did 3 setups, period. So I'm showing you stuff, most of this didn't ever run, and no one has ever seen this stuff. And then there's outtakes as well. So these were, the way this presentation is various things I would try. So As For, again. This is Jean-Paul Knott. He is currently living in Belgium, and he's a women's wear and menswear designer. Oh, another thing. See, I have notes. Another thing, there are some things I remember really well and some things that are shockingly blank gaps. So I'll tell you when I think it's true and when I might just be making it up. I think, I may be making this up, that this is Jean-Paul's first Daniel, it's a show. It's when you don't have a runway. It's a presentation. Thank you. Look, I used my
Phone a friend.
Phone a friend. That's yes. I think this was his first presentation in New York, coinciding with one fashion week at the end of the 90s. The nicest man, the best furry pants that you have ever seen in your life. This is Yoshio Taniguchi. Yoshio was the architect who was awarded the redesign for MoMA. This was, I don't know, a year or so before construction actually started, but he had won the job at that point. There were so many cool things about doing this, and I think just in my whole career as a portrait shooter rather than doing anything else, although all those other things certainly have their historical markers, which I find amazing. But like, MoMA's never going to look the same again, and it was so wonderful to be able to photograph this guy in this space that he ended up ultimately completely transforming. This is Elizabeth Peyton, the painter, the wonderful, wonderful painter, right at, I believe, towards the beginning of her career. She was obviously getting some press already. She had a apartment. This was an apartment that was used as a studio in a basement in the East Village somewhere. And no one could live there, but it was her working space. This is Karim Rashid, the product designer. I believe he's had a long and amazing career. This was when things were really just taking off for him. I would also get these funny projects where, like, they were architecture projects. I basically ended up shooting the house. And I don't know why Dennis and Rebecca hired me, but I would get these jobs if there was one portrait sort of at the end of the day. And when these things would run, this would be an example of something where I would get maybe a couple of pages where stuff would run really small, sort of collaged on 1 or 2 pages. This is Kathy and Lindy Jones. They are 2 sisters who had bought this house out in the Hamptons, and it was super fancy and nice. So I was supposed to go and shoot the house with all the furniture. And then they were dressed, and we got to do a couple of portraits with them. This is something that obviously would never run, but this was in the house. It was this amazing bird cage, and it was a nice opportunity just to make a picture for myself. This did end up running. I recall. So then there was this store called The Apartment that is still in business. This was when they were under construction. And the idea for The Apartment, I believe, was that they were going to have 2 models sort of in the space while the store was open as the residents of this retail store. And the retail store was designed as someone's home that you were going into. And there would be 2 fake people living fake lives. And the idea was that you would be able to go in and everything was for sale. You could rummage through their closets, you could rummage through their drawers, you could rummage through the refrigerator, and every single thing was a product that was for sale. it was a curious idea, and I looked them up, and they're still in business, although I think they ended up being bought or sold, but it's in Soho. I don't know if they have fake people still living there, but that was the original idea. This is Miguel Adrover. Really nice man, great fashion designer. This was at the time when he was designing, but he also had a retail store in the East Village called Horn, hence the horns. At the end of the shoot, his neighbor came over, and it's sort of funny, like, it's just changing so quickly, and I can't imagine like photographs of people sitting on garbage cans are going to be able to be made in that neighborhood for very much longer, and all of that sort of romance, that historical romance of that neighborhood is going so quickly. So I'm happy that I have this. When I was retouching it, I noticed that so the neighbor is really amazingly old school, and that dress has a stitch right at the front of it that is definitely hand done. And I just sort of thought that it was ironic that here's this little old grandma from the country, and this guy who's selling these incredibly expensive garments sort of directly behind them. And I sort of loved the juxtaposition of those things. She died, I think, within a year of this picture, and they were very close. So it was nice to have that for Miguel. This is Jeffrey Kalinsky of the Jeffrey store in the Meatpacking District. This is when that store was under construction. It was going to be a big deal. It is and has become and remains a super big deal. I believe it was definitely one of the first fashion retail stores of that caliber to move into the area. And of course, many other labels followed suit. Again, it was such a great opportunity to have that space as raw and rough as it was, and to see the thing that it's now become. It's definitely his business partner. I don't know if it's his boyfriend or not. I think that it's not. I think that they were just business partners, but I could be wrong. Milk had recently opened, and Milk is, of course, right next door. So we were able to get a deal because it was bizarre, and to pop upstairs and shoot them sort of as a studio setup real quick. This is Susan and Eliza Minot. They are sisters with several siblings in between, but Susan is the oldest out of the group, and Eliza is the youngest. At this point, Susan was a very well-established author and had worked on film scripts and had a very sort of amazing reputation. Eliza had just gotten her first book deal, and she had gotten on the same publisher with the same editor that Susan had done. And I remember them thinking that there was going to be some talk about that and some favoritism and that sort of thing going on. And they were courting some press to try to get ahead of that story, to allow Eliza to have a writing career of her own, and to be able to earn her own way in the literary world. We ended up going out to the family's house off an island in Maine, and it was one of those great trips where you end up on a ferry with the writer. There was literally one hotel room left, so I had to share it with the writer, which really freaked me out because I like my privacy at night. And And then it ended up being so okay. She was like, it was a big room, and she was the nicest person ever. And we rode around with the taxi driver. There was only one who had this oxygen tank in the back of his car, and that also made me nervous. But then you get to be in a place like this, which is just like fantastic. So Eliza is gorgeous, and I got to photograph her sort of a bunch. This is Jeffrey Bill Huber. I'll confess at this point that I can't remember why I was there. I actually have no idea. But I'm guessing that it was because his house is really nice. And he just, like, Jeffrey was like one of those classic 50s and 40s, like, New York gay guys who I hold in such high esteem, just the way that he dressed and the way that he carried himself. And it was, I remember just liking him very much as a person. So this would have been, I guess we're around 99 maybe at this point. Time jumps a little bit here in terms of years, but let's just say we're in 99 and then we'll go back a year or so. Liz Tilberis passes away in 1999. She runs Harper's Bazaar from 92 to 99, and she passes away from ovarian cancer. She's not even 50 yet. And I never did get to meet her. Kate Betts is the editor-in-chief who took over Bazaar at that point, and there was a seismic staff change at Bazaar at that time. Dennis Galanka was shooting really great fashion and took it as an opportunity to give it a try. He wanted to see if he could shoot, and he's a really great fashion shooter. Rebecca is a really wonderful journalist and documentary shooter. She's still a very good friend of mine today, and she decided to leave at that point, and have never done a job for Bazaar again. By this point, other things had sort of come up. I was working for some business magazines. I was working for Food and Wine here and there. There were other things going on. And one day, Rolling Stone calls. And of course, they're a dream client, right? This was the era of Fred Woodward, the genius, absolute genius designer and art director and creative director. Rachel Netfer was the photography director, and Fiona Farrell was also working there. Fiona called me, and she said, "Hey, I've got a job for you. Do you want to go and shoot some gay teenagers? David Lipsky is working on this story, and we thought you would be a good match for this. I think you can shoot it in black and white." And of course I said yes. I mean, this is why I wanted this. This is why I wanted to be in this craft and to be in this world of magazines. And it was this kind of story that I really wanted to pursue. This project changed my life. It was there were many firsts for this project. It was my first job where I ever shot more than one person. It was my first job where I ever traveled anywhere. I was extremely naive and really green, and didn't realize that I could take an assistant on a project like this. Opted not to because I thought these people are all going to be really young, and maybe it would be more intimate and less scary for them if I just go alone. I kind of didn't know, and I just I just did it. So I can't remember. I know I went to Boston. I know I went to Atlanta. I may have gone to Mississippi. I definitely went to Indianapolis. This guy's name is Shama. He, I believe, was in Atlanta. It's one of those luxury projects where you just go and spend a day with someone, and that never happens anymore, hardly. You could talk to people, and you could like look at their stuff, and you could try lots and lots of different things, and they were cool with you being there, and they were excited to be a part of this and have their story told. This is Conniption. It was so amazing to me, like the diversity of people that David found to interview. I mean, in this was 98. Yeah, it's 2017 now. This was 1998. And she was a 17-year-old transsexual. I still have the issue that, and she said, I read some of the interview, and she said, yeah, I've started hormone treatment, and then I'll be able to start having surgery when I turn 18. She was a brassy teenager. We went and had dinner the night before we ended up shooting, and she was giving me all kinds of like kid versus old man grief, and I was only 25. But she was a spark plug. Okay, Patrick. Patrick is really a wonderful person. I had this incredibly daunting experience with him in that he lied to his mother. Most of the people, almost everybody, was under 18 years of age, so I needed to have their parents sign. And Patrick lied to his mom. I don't know what he told her, but I think it was something. This could be a complete lie, but what I remember is he said Rolling Stone is interested in the musical tastes of teenagers like me. And she's a smart lady, and she's like, what? They're gonna fly someone from New York to Indianapolis to talk to you about what cassettes you're playing? And we did the whole shoot, and then I was like, oh yeah, hey, Mrs. Patrick's mom, would you sign the model release? And then she's like, what is this for? And then she refused. She refused to sign. So it was awkward, and I left her one saying, maybe you'll change your mind, and this is not a conversation that I can have with you. This is a conversation that you have to have with my editor or somebody else at the office. And I'd like to leave this form with you, and then you and Patrick can talk about this. And then I ended up going back. I don't know what happened, but I ended up being flown back there to shoot him again for a completely new shoot. And I don't think she signed, but then...
Part of the same story?
Yes, for exactly the same story. And then they ran a picture anyway. So I'm not sure. The legal stuff is fascinating on sensitive stories like this. So this is Dylan. He's still a very good friend of mine today. We became great friends because of this project. And he moved around a lot, moved to New York. He was here for a while. He's married now, and he and his husband just moved to London. So he's a very good friend. This is Michael, our goth kid. He was going to a gay support center, a gay youth center, and I think these were all girls from his posse. And this is Kelly. So I'm in Salt Lake City now, and it was really interesting because everybody was single except for the Salt Lake City people. Kelly was amazing. She told me this story about how her grandfather was a bathtub moonshine bootlegger. So this is her with her girlfriend. And I think these two were girlfriends and just friends of Kelly's. So then Nathan and his boyfriend Aaron, also in Salt Lake. This was interesting. David hadn't interviewed them, and we didn't have any gay boys who were together. There wasn't a gay male couple for the story, and I was hoping that we could get something like that. And Kelly knew Nathan, but she didn't have his phone number, and I called Fiona and I said, hey, do you mind if I stay? Like, I think I got a lead on the boys. And they allowed me to change the ticket, and this was so great. Kelly says, just go to this coffee shop and maybe they'll be there. I don't know how to get a hold of them otherwise. So I did, and Nathan shows up, and I said, hey, can you shoot tomorrow? Can you shoot this thing for Rolling Stone tomorrow and maybe be interviewed later by phone? David, as I said, David hadn't interviewed them, and then the story editor, who was different than Fiona, had contacted me after I had gotten back to New York, and she said, hey, we have no caption information. I don't know anything about these guys. Can you write something up for me and send it? And I was like, I don't know how to do that. So why don't I figure it out and I'll send you something. So I called Nathan, and he ended up answering the phone. And this was also like a huge thing for me. We ended up talking for more than an hour on the phone. And I asked questions, he answered. I had never interviewed anybody before, and it didn't even really feel like it was a real interview. It just was like this conversation where amazingly interesting things. I didn't have time to sort of ask them how they had met and how they had gotten this apartment together and what they were doing in school and all of this sort of stuff. But we did have this chance to do it on the phone. And I have become obsessed with asking people questions, and I think part of what's been a strength of mine as an editorial shooter on sensitive stories has been this ability to break ice that way and not just go in and say, hey, stand there and do this. My friend Heather Conley, who worked with me for many, many years, said that I was the greediest photographer that she had ever met. And if the people wouldn't kick me out, then I wouldn't leave. And let's try this other situation, let's try this other shot, let's try this other shot. And that's probably true. So this is, we're all in such a weird sort of spot in the world with everything that's incredibly obvious, and sometimes I think human beings have this incredible capacity for, forgetting the super bad things so that they can get on with their lives and engage in the act of being alive. And Will and Grace has come and gone since this shoot happened. There are obviously incredible issues of human rights and immigration rights at stake in the current climate in which we're living. And I don't know if anybody is on the Visual Aids Instagram feed, but it's really good, and maybe you may want to consider hooking up with them. It's a nonprofit arts organization that does many, many things. including being formal representation for artists who have made work. They represent the estates for artists who have either passed away from AIDS or there is no place for that work to go. There is a place which is Visual AIDS, and they do exhibitions and they do many, many wonderful things. So lest we forget, I'd like to read something that I saw on the Instagram feed. And it's a fax. Recipient information, to faggot. Company, Visual AIDS. Sender information, from Mrs. Gas the Gaze. Company, fuck off nigger. Phone number, sent on Thursday, March 30th, 2017. Kill yourself, you fucking kike fags. I hope you all die a slow, painful death. You know, for such a brief note, it's really encompassing. I emailed them today and asked permission to use that in the talk. And they said that they've gotten several other faxes since this one on March 30th. So, lest we forget, it's always good to keep fighting the fight. And I did look up David Lipsky's information prior to coming this evening, and I believe he did win a GLAAD award, which is a media award for the positive representation of the LGBT community in the media. And I believe that David won it for this particular story. Another incredible thing happened because of this Rolling Stone story. They did this little profile on me that actually ran. I had shot the gay teen story. Then they did this profile. I think we were held up because of Patrick's situation with the model release and can we, can't we, I don't know, blah, blah, let's talk to the lawyers. And this other issue got sort of snaked in before the gay teen story ran. And they did this enormous profile on, it was this incredible mix of like real people and then celebrities. And I got asked to be a part of this. So this was how the picture ran and the opener. And I was asked to do this self-portrait, and I had wanted set up the picture to have all of my best friends represented in the picture. So there's pictures from my friend John Clark and the bike I was riding at the time, and my friend Patty is in there, and my friend Adamar and John Stoa are in there. And in that story, it talks about where I was from, the town that I grew up in, and that I was gay, and et cetera, et cetera. I was 25 and living my life and trying to work and all this sort of other stuff. So remember, this is the era of the pager, not the cell phone. And I get this phone call at home on my landline, and I never picked up the phone, but I just picked up the phone. And this guy called me. He said, I got your phone number from information. And I saw that story about you in Rolling Stone, and I was wondering if I could just talk to you for a minute. And I said, sure. And he said, I'm from where you are. Well, I'm from the same town that you're from. I saw that what it said in the article, and I'm gay too, and I don't know how to come out to my parents, and I was wondering if I could just talk to you about it because I'm really worried, but it needs to happen. And we ended up talking for a long time, and it was a really incredible sort of moment for me. The guy never told me his name. He called me from a payphone. Never knew his name. Never heard from him again. And I remember them telling us in school that that you do this job with incredible care, and you care about the people that you're photographing, and you respect them, and you treat this job with honor, and that this work is extremely powerful. And I was like, what do you mean powerful? I don't understand. And it was after that phone call where I did really understand that this work is super, super important. And lest we forget. So life bumps on. Michelle Romero at Entertainment Weekly had seen the Gay Teen Story run, and she had put my name in the hat with Sarah Rosen, who was another photo editor at Entertainment Weekly, to shoot Don Knotts. And I did it, and I didn't blow it. It ran full page, and I think for about 11 or 12 years, I never had to try to get work again. It just came. These are some outtakes, obviously. He was in his 90s by this point, and I think he lived to be over 100, or 200, or just 101 maybe. And I liked him from Three's Company. I know I'm supposed to say Andy Griffith, but I liked him from Three's Company. This is Michael Henry Adams. This was another home story. I started shooting a lot of them for New York Magazine at the time. He had a beautiful apartment up in Harlem, and I was told he dressed like a dandy and just was like the coolest guy ever. This is Eva Zeisel. She was shot for Fast Company, the historically super important designer. This is Dr. Eve Bruce. She was, she had two lives, a plastic surgeon and a shaman healer. And the way that I remember it is that she said, I'd rather talk you out of surgery, but if you really want fake boobs, I have the skill to do that, and I have a mortgage to pay. So this was for Health Magazine, and the idea was just to shoot her, you know, living both of her lives. Her daughter was gracious enough to be the model for the surgery. And then there was a story for People in Espanol, and it was like, it was such a goofy one. Sexy in the City, it was called. And I was like, hot, sexy single men. And it was a portfolio, so I didn't say no. And I remember we shot this bartender, and it grosses me out to admit it, but I made him lie on the bar like he was lying on a car hood. And then we had a boxer who was like the most jacked man you've ever seen in your life, like stunningly beautiful. It was hard to look at him. It was sort of like, he was like looking at the sun, too beautiful. And then there was Angel, who was a firefighter. And I admit it, I tried like stepping out of the things, and it was just awful, awful, awful. So I'm only showing you the straight portraits, which I liked better. So Sexy Fireman. And so this was shot on September 8th, 2000. And an angel died in the World Trade Center. And I didn't really know for sure, but I did see it after the incredible craziness was over in the media. I was on a job and I was watching the news in a hotel TV, and they were running some profiles on people who had passed away, and Angel was an obvious candidate because he had done these reality shows and he liked it. He liked being in the media. And I saw that he had passed away, and I went home and I went through the files, and I had 2 prints that the lab had made that had been returned to me after the story ran. And I packed them up, and I went to the firehouse, which is right here. It's the 19th Street one, right across the street from where Print Space was. And I walked into the office that literally he's framed up in the doorway of that office, and I handed the package over to the guy that was sitting there, and he opens the thing up, and he starts crying immediately. And I said, you know, so I was thinking one is for the station and one is for his mom. And then I ran away. I couldn't deal with it. So I don't know if she ever got it, but I'm sure that she did. So then we go to war. I had been shooting for Newsweek already at this point, but this really completely solidified my relationship with them. I was never on staff, but I worked basically every week in some capacity for 11 years. It started off, you know, by the afternoon of September 11th, 2001, I think everybody understood we were at war, because we had a president who actually followed protocol at the time rather than just launching missiles. And we had a president who actually went through Congress. I knew that there was going to be some time. And the way that that schedule played out for me personally was that we ended up doing all of these stories related to the World Trade Center specifically and to New York. Children who had lost parents in the World Trade Center, businesses that had been destroyed either by geographic location or direct financial piggybacking and piggybacking with businesses that were in the World Trade Center that were not there anymore. Stories about funerals, stories about everything. And then troops started to go off to war, and I started doing all kinds of stories about the troops coming back. I never went to Iraq, and I was never asked to go to Iraq, and I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I would have been able to do that. But I was incredibly happy to work on the stories that I did here, to honor in the best way that I could the people that had done what they had done in the service of this country. This is a portfolio of people who had been wounded. This guy had been shot in the shoulder, and he was going back for a second tour. This was a training area that was on the base. So it's not a real bunker, it's a training bunker. I wish I could remember this guy's name. He's really important. I was told that we had gotten someone who had been shot in the head and was willing to be photographed. I can't remember where he was. I know it was the Pacific Northwest, Spokane, Seattle, or Portland, Oregon. It was one of those 3 places. And the front of his head is a plate. The front of his skull was blown away, and I was told that he was missing an eye. And I remember on the plane having this conversation with myself saying, when you get there, do not flinch. No matter what it looks like, you cannot flinch, because that is going to be, he'll know, it's going to be the highest form of disrespect that you can give this guy, period. Do not flinch, whatever it looks like. And it kind of became the mantra going forward. I couldn't believe that he let me photograph his eye. And I asked, and he said, sure. This guy had been shot in the face. He was in the process of a series of surgeries for correcting what could be done. He was so swollen when he returned to the States, and his mother was able to finally come to the hospital to see him, that the only way she actually recognized him was because of the tattoo on his arm. It was the only way that she was able to recognize that that was her son. This one was really hard for me because I couldn't understand what he was saying. His jaw was wired shut, and I was trying really hard to have a conversation with him, and I couldn't do it. I literally couldn't understand what he was trying to say. And on this one, mercifully, the writer had come, and the writer was okay, and the interview was very short. The shoot was very short, and the writer was able to sort of compensate for my deficit in this particular situation. I remember he ended up vomiting twice while we were shooting. The meds that he was on was making him really ill, and he would go and throw up and then come back to work. And then he would get sick again, and he would leave for a minute, and then he would come back, and we would continue shooting. This was wallpaper in the kitchen. I was able to get him to sit down, and I just wanted to show this because this has it's a nice view of the trach hole from the scar from the trach. This is, when people had snapshots, I would never take them. I liked to just do copy work of those photographs so that any original last prints would never get lost that way, and people could just keep their stuff. So this is a photograph of our guy here, sort of before and after. I started keeping notebooks with Polaroids when I was doing these jobs. Sometimes they would be like 6 shoots in 6 days. It was extremely frantic. Many of the shoots were multiple people in groups which needed to be sorted out. I would get model releases signed from everybody, but then forget, like when I walked out the door, what people's names were. So I started going back to Nathan and the Gay Teens Project. Because of that experience that I had with Nathan, it occurred to me that it would behoove me to start making notebooks for my editors so that the people that I photographed wouldn't have to get calls either from me or from them saying, oh, by the way, who was this person? And the notebooks ended up becoming really detailed, and I would just hand them in with a job. Apparently no one else was doing this, although it seemed very obvious to me that this is a smart thing to do. And it's a great source of pride to me that editors have come back later and said that they stole some of my books. So I'm missing a bunch of them because people stole them at the office, and that makes me really happy. So it just continued. I mean, these were more wounded guys. I had notes on him. I've forgotten almost everybody's name. I know he was married. He was about to get divorced. He had kids. He was a tank driver. He had been wounded during practice, stateside, not abroad, and had several of his vertebrae fused together because of the spinal injury. This was at Walter Reed. Same gentleman. This is Melissa Stockwell. She is the first female amputee, first military female amputee from this conflict in Iraq. This was an example of traumatic brain injury. It's a boy and his father. This was in a hospital in Chicago. And It's funny when you look at the picture really close. When I was doing the retouching, you can see that their faces they're exactly the same person, just a couple of years apart. The physical therapy crew was really upset that they did not want him photographed this way with his legs curled up. Apparently it's like really bad form, and they were constantly trying to stretch his legs out, and his hand would close up and his legs would close up, and it was a natural resting place for him, and the muscles would lock, and it was very hard to sort of elongate his limbs again. And they said, don't show a photograph of that. That's not good PT work. We want to show that his body is improving. He always, when he looked at you, he always looked like he was smiling. He couldn't speak. So I never know if he was okay with me being there and these photographs being taken. I asked him, and I was, his dad said it was okay. So that's why I continued to stay and do it. And he did look like he was smiling, although I always choose the non-smiley ones. Double amputee. She's amazing. This is Connie Spinks. She was burned in a Humvee, and she ended up meeting her husband, who's also an amputee, at Walter Reed when they were recovering. And this was a back injury. So there was other random stuff going on at this time. This is Bill Keller from the New York Times. Senators, Mitch McConnell. This is probably my proudest moment ever. This was about Gagan, the Catholic priest, molesting the boys in Massachusetts. I got a call on Tuesday night from my editor Myra, and she said, "Go to Boston tomorrow." I was like, "I'm really sick." Go to Boston tomorrow, and I'm gonna wait for my phone call. I don't know where you're going, but you'll get a call. And it ended up being this story, and Newsweek ended up beating every other weekly news magazine for a cover story. Everyone was scrambling the following week to get covers, and there were more and more and more stories. The Boston Globe broke the story originally, obviously, we all know that. And then Newsweek was the first national weekly to break it. These were all people who were molested by Catholic priests. This was a story about the lost boys of Sudan who were being brought over by a Christian organization. I believe they were all orphans, and we shot in the Midwest somewhere. There were many locations that these kids were brought to, but I went somewhere in the Midwest. I like the idea of sort of marrying this Americana junk with people who had never used a telephone before and never bought shoes at a store before and never had a refrigerator before. This is a teenage prostitute story. The challenge for this, they were being pimped out of the Mall of America. I was told in the brief that these kids were having sex so they could buy fancy jeans, like $400 jeans, and that they were coming from normal families and they were just like having sex in the bus depot to buy jeans, which can't be entirely true. I think that was the brief that was given to my editor, and then the story progressed because obviously these people were not living at home anymore. They were in shelters and halfway homes, and because they were minors, we were not allowed to show their faces. So the challenge was to obscure them in some way. Okay, so I'd like to read one thing, and then I'll just blaze through the rest of this. While I was doing the Newsweek stuff, I was also constantly shooting celebrity work here and there. And the celebrity work was kind of like the mental antidote to all of the other things that I was seeing on a regular basis. I wanted to read one thing. Cynthia Carr has this beautiful biography about the artist David Wojnarowicz, who I would highly recommend everybody read because it's such a great book just about David and the history of the 80s East Village art gallery scene. It's a phenomenal book. There's a scene, so David's an AIDS activist as well and died of AIDS. I'll just read this. This is about an interaction that the artist Zoe Leonard had with David, as told to Cynthia, who wrote the book. One day she asked him to come to her apartment and look at some prints. I was taking all these aerial photographs, Zoe said, and I confided in him about this conflict I was having as an artist about the intensity of the activist work and the harshness of the reality of the AIDS crisis, and I was photographing clouds. There was just beginning to be a little bit of interest in my work. I had been offered a one-person show, and I remember being really confused. Like, what do I do? There's this divide in my life, and I showed him all these prints. I used to work en masse, and I had stacks and stacks of prints all over the floor, and he was so kind. Her voice broke as she recounted what David told her. Zoe, these are beautiful, and that's what we're fighting for. We're being angry and complaining because we have to, but where we want to go back to is beauty. If you let go of that, we don't have anywhere to go. So I think that celebrity work is as historically important as any of the war stuff, as anything. These moments in pop culture define us as an entire society as much as hardcore journalistic stuff does. It'd be fun to tell you the stories about all these people. Some of them are like real A-list people, some of them are not, just people that I think are super cool. But I love meeting these people because sometimes it's so great just to be in a room where people are pretty and they sing amazing songs and they act really well and the movie is incredible. And I like being around that as much as I like being around anything else. So there's one last little bit here, and I'll tell you that speaking of 20 years, it's like the death card in that tarot pack came up for me, and like life is going to change again. And I've been working on this project for about 5 years, which I think is where my life is headed next. I want to have a gallery show. I'm looking for a gallery. I am interested in publishing a book. This is a personal project I've been working on that is just about light. I shot this in my bedroom. It became many, many different things over the years. It started off as a black and white project. Then it started off as a project that was retouched real open because I was thinking maybe I could start showing this and trying to get some fashion work. And then I just thought, I don't care about that. This is my damn project and I'm going to do it my way. And the most seductive thing about the pictures was the enormous, huge chunks of black and the little bit of sparkle in that rectangle of light. And I'll argue that these aren't portraits at all. I think these are just pictures of light, and they're pictures of absolutely nothing. I started using the frames, the bodies as frames to catch the light and to make a shape. And it sort of was really completely antithetical to what my whole career has been up until this point. And this stuff, I'm super happy. I'm almost done with this. I'm done shooting, and I have 4 weeks to go on the retouching, and then the whole project is done. So thank you for your time. A question.
Thank you for sharing. My name is Brooklyn, and I am in my last year of my master's thesis program, and looking at the work that you're doing right now, especially this in part, and something that really resonated with me is like you started off the project thinking it's going to be a fashion portfolio, and then you decided to do it as a project. What was the change in you that made you think about it? This is my project, and I want to do it in a specific way.
I think in some way I've always been aiming there's sort of been part of my life that's always been aiming in this direction. I've always been interested in pursuing some kind of gallery career. I think what it was is that I realized that the pictures would be completely unsaleable in a commercial market. I was showing it and I was getting a pretty poor response commercially because there's so no detail in many of the images, or huge chunks of the body are just completely missing. And the prints are really pretty. Like when I make the prints, I like the way that the prints look. And I knew that the pictures weren't as strong when I retouched them more open. And I shot over 70 people for this project, and it's been 5 years of my life, and I just thought this is the glue. My friend Paul and my friend Carrie both have put exhibitions together, and I think what's always been lacking in the work that I've done assignment-wise was the specs. The specs were, hey, I need you to go there and shoot that person on seamless. I need you to go there and shoot it environmentally. I need you to go there and shoot it in the office. Go there, it has to be outside. And the pictures served the purpose for the story, but they don't hold water as a body of work. It's too random. And I was watching Paul and Carrie put shows together, and I think I really admire you for being able to be in a program like this, because I don't feel like I'm in, and I say this with all seriousness, I don't think I'm intelligent enough or have the drive or the patience to be able to go through a master's program. So I really admire that you're able to do it, because I barely made it out of high school. Not to mention college. And this was the one thing that I had that held water together as a single unit. Does that answer it?
Going back to your portraits, when you look through your images when you're editing, what are some of the things that you look for that signal a good shot?
Oh, that's a good question, because the answer is really specific. I'll propose a theory to you that photographs have sound in them. And for example, if you look at a David LaChapelle photograph, there's a lot of loud volume in that picture, and I've always gravitated towards the silent pictures. And it's interesting now that we all edit digitally, nothing is side by side anymore. Everything is stacked on top of each other. And because everything is stacked on top of each other, you can see people breathe. And I've noticed that I always pick the image. I always pick the exhale. I always pick the most silent moment. And that's the thing that's most attractive in the setup. This was because almost all of this was scanned film, it was not that experience, but that's definitely what I aim for now. Just quiet.
Hi. One thing that struck me about a lot of the portraits, especially the more journalistic portraits that you're going out on location, is you still have such a nice, clean compositions in a lot of these location portraits. When you go out, What are some of the things that go through your mind? Because a lot, you're showing up and, of course, not knowing what you're going to find when you get there. So maybe a little bit about how you think about how you're going to place your subject in the frame.
Yeah, you know, one of my heroes is Arnold Newman, who I think was one of the greatest composers ever. And he was a hero of mine from almost the beginning. And of course, there are always different scenarios, right? You get there the day before and you actually have time to look around, or you get off the plane and you go and do the shoot immediately. And I'm pretty methodical about it. I look, I say hello, I look around, I make a list. Then I'll go to the subject and say, are you okay with doing these 3 shots? I'd like to make sure that you are totally cool with this, and I'm going to ask you for what I want, and if you're not okay with this, that is completely okay. And I always gravitate towards things where I think I can frame someone up in something. I look for it, and I feel like I tend to repeat myself sometimes, as we all do, and I notice the itch comes up when I feel like my composition is getting really boring and too redundant. That's when I feel like I need to start a new project to shake that up. But I love it. I love everything being in its right place.
Thank you. Ethan, you alluded to this in talking about the Rolling Stone story. I'm interested in the interplay between the photography and the editorial side of the house, the writer and the editor, and perhaps the tension between those two. And you have such a capacity for perceiving individuals and appreciating them, and in relating to them, engaging with them. I would think that in the course of the work you have done, you would be developing dimensions of the story that the writer perhaps would not be aware of. And I would think you would want to be pushing, driving the story writing as well as the photography taking. How did that play out?
You know, Christine, it's a good point. Because I liked talking to people so much, I really enjoyed the idea. I think less with the gay teens, because that was all brand new, and it took me a while to figure all of that stuff out. But once I kicked in with Newsweek, and I knew it was something that I was doing, I made a very conscious effort to have those conversations with people, to try to make the photographs elaborate on part of the story that the writer couldn't get. There were circumstances with Newsweek, especially where the story editor had such a specific agenda, and I would hear these reporters. We were often going together where I would be setting up while the interview was happening, and I would eavesdrop because, of course, I was super curious. And there was a set of questions and a specific time frame that was not deviated from. And I had the luxury of being able to have those other conversations. Hey, what's in that book over there? What did you mean when you were talking to the guy about that? And I would try to bring those things into the photograph to try to, if the consumer would bother to look at the picture, it would help with the story a little bit more, to tell another part of the story that is not in the text. I will, in all honesty, tell you that I never cared what ran. I never cared what picture ran. I tried my hardest. I would send the notebooks in. I never cared how the pictures were cropped, what was big, what was small. It was not my job. It was the job of the art directors and the story editors to pick what they felt best told the story that they wanted to tell. And how they did that, I didn't care. I was happy to make the pictures, and I had them for myself, and I knew that. And whatever happened, I also never liked looking at stuff run. It embarrassed me to see it in print. It freaked me out, and I can't tell you why. It was mortally embarrassing to see the stuff in print. So I never looked, and I also didn't care. But I let them know what I thought, and then whatever happened after that was what happened.
Thank you, Ethan, for a wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at SVA. We are thrilled to have photographer Ethan Hill as tonight's guest speaker. Ethan is a portrait and celebrity photographer based in New York. He's a graduate of Art Center College of Design in California. His projects are wide-ranging and include anything from A-list celebrities in film, theater, and music, to scientists working on cutting-edge research in medicine and technology. Clients include Entertainment Weekly, Esquire Magazine, Rolling Stone, Food and Wine, Harper's Bazaar, Newsweek, Time, Dell Computers, and UPS, among others. Aside from his commercial assignments, Ethan is involved in shooting personal, portrait-based projects, teaching at the International Center for Photography, in making and publishing artist books. So please help me welcome Ethan Hill to our lecture series.
Thank you, everybody. Daniel. I'd love to thank SVA for having me. This is a huge honor to be here, and to Jaime for inviting me. It's sort of, the timing is sort of perfect. This is the year that I've been in New York for 20 years. Next year is going to be the year that the big project that I ended up shooting that gave... This was the era, in 1992, this cover was the launch for a redesign, I believe. And Liz Tilberis was the editor-in-chief at Bazaar at the time. 92 was, if I read all of the information correctly, 92 was her first year there, and this was the relaunch of the magazine. Beautifully steered by Fabian Baron as the creative director. And I was 1 year into college at that time, and I remember seeing this cover, and it was just like one of those moments where you just, like, the image sinks in. You are just, like, something strikes you so viscerally, and maybe you don't have words as to why, and I think maybe 20-odd years later, today, I actually just figured out why this picture made such a huge impact on me. It was photographed by Patrick de Marchelier, and this was the beginning of Liz's era. Dennis Galanka, towards the end of the 90s, 97, 98, Dennis Galanka was the director, and Rebecca Greenfield was the, worked with Dennis, and I was on the phone with those two all the time. And for me, when they were the nicest people under the sun, I heard that Liz Tilberis was the kindest person ever in a position that high, and I always wanted to meet her, and I never had the opportunity to. And I called Dennis up one day and I said, hey, you know, on a personal note, and I thought, wow, yeah, why not? If you're gonna shoot the cat really nicely, then why not be that? So for this evening, I broke my life up into 4 parts. And I wanted to start at the beginning in the late 90s. So I moved to New York and got a job at 68 Degrees, which was a really wonderful black and white lab, which sort of doesn't exist anymore, only technically, and got folded into LTI. I worked there for many years, and 68 was the sort of high-end editorial fashion division. It catered to people like Stefan Seddenwy, and photographers of that caliber. It was fashion work that we were going for. My job was at the front desk, packing jobs, which meant I would go through film. I would make sure all of the contacts had been made for every roll of film that was run. I would dry prints, I would spot prints for dust. And when it was a real emergency, which it often was, I was messenger boy. And I would get on my bike and I would haul stuff up to whose ever office needed it. I was on the phone all the time, and I was the sort of like gatekeeper for, did you get your job on time or not? And most of the people were really, really nice to work with. And one of the clients was Harper's Bazaar. So, me a career and put me on the map. Will be the 20th anniversary next year of that project. If it's possible to dedicate nights to people, I'd like to dedicate this evening to Karen Pearson, who I couldn't have gotten it together for tonight without her help. So thank you for that. I was trying to think of, so I wanted to talk to you guys about, seeing as it's 20 years, here's 20 years of my life. I was trying to think of one word to sum this time up, and it's been a very interesting, weird, great trip to sort of go back through the boxes and look at all of this stuff again. And tumbleweed was the word that came to mind. I feel like I have lived like a tumbleweed in this business for the last 20 years. There's a really great Ruth Bernhardt documentary, which I think is sort of hard to find. I recently went back and looked on Amazon, I looked on eBay, and I couldn't find it. The last place I saw it was at the bookstore at the ICP, and you know, everybody knows Ruth Bernhardt's nudes and the still lives, and she has this great line in the film where someone asks her to shoot their cat, I think. It was a cat or a dog, and she very sort of nonchalantly said, well, you know, and then all of a sudden I was Ruth Bernhardt, pet photographer. Can I come in and show you some work? And he said, by all means, when do you want to come in? And Dennis gave me my start, and Rebecca gave me my start. So in '97, I started shooting fashion designers. I was the front of the book man for Harper's Bazaar. I absolutely loved the job. It was, everybody knew that was coming up. New boutique owners, amazing artists, up-and-coming writers, everybody that was getting their first chance, that was like the new buzz. I got to photograph many of those people. This is As For. They were, well, I guess this was sort of like a 90s phenomenon. They all lived together, and they all were in business together, and they all had cats, and they basically were always together. And I don't know, I just said, hey, can you all raise your cats up in the air? And I got one frame. The cats freaked out. We lost them immediately, scratching, hissing. Cats were gone under the bed, and that was over. Oh, I forgot to say something. The way I designed this presentation is that I had this personal rule for myself on every job, no matter if it was like all day or 10 minutes, I always did 3 setups, period. So I'm showing you stuff, most of this didn't ever run, and no one has ever seen this stuff. And then there's outtakes as well. So these were, the way this presentation is various things I would try. So as for, again,